you'll have 7 figures in the bank so that you can go out and scale that business more quickly. Because, you know, it's interesting. I think the key thing that my FACE methodology and that fundraising generally enables is it makes growth faster.
Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show, where today I have with me best-selling author David B. Horne. Now, I'm really excited to talk to David. I actually started to read his book last weekend, although admittedly I haven't got to the end of it yet, but I tell you, it's something I'll definitely be finishing next weekend. And David is he's a CFO, he's a funding expert, mergers and acquisitions expert, and a specialist in exiting businesses for founders. And he has a methodology which he calls FACE, which we're going to talk all about today, and hear his strategies and the theories he's got for, I guess, what I would say as someone who's very much in the funding space and who very much believes in acquiring businesses and applying as much funding as possible to the businesses I'm involved in. David's strategies are probably a breath of fresh air in what's normally a very organic world. So he's very much about. Well, I'll tell you what. Rather than me telling them about it, David, I'm gonna chuck it over to you, and you can. I won't spoil the joy of what your methodology is. But thanks a lot for being here before we start.
Pleasure.
And yeah, obviously I've given a little bit of background to yourself, but if you could, you can flesh it out and tell us how it all began.
Yeah, sure. I'll start with how it all began. So I'm originally from Canada, hence the accent. I trained as a chartered accountant with PwC. I am a fluent German speaker, and as a result of that, I had an opportunity to move with PwC to a German-speaking office, and they offered me a job in Zurich. So my wife and I moved to Zurich in 1987, spent a couple of years with PwC, then got a job offer with a client. We moved to London in 93, so we've been living in London ever since. And for the next 10 years, I was with a bunch of big sort of blue-chip corporates, AT&T, the BBC. And then I started gradually getting into smaller, more entrepreneurial businesses. And between 2000 and 2010, I was with 3 very different companies that all had one thing in common, which was that they were raising money and growing by acquisition. So the first was a PR agency group headquartered out of New York. And I bought 7 PR agencies with them around Europe, UK, Belgium, Germany. And we were negotiating deals in France, Italy, and Spain when our parent company got bought out. So that kind of quickly ground to a halt. But as a result of the relationships I developed there, I got introduced to a man who had recently launched a cash shell on AIM with a very clear buy and build strategy. And he had made his first acquisition when I joined the business as the first CFO of the company. And over the next 3 years, we raised £60 million and bought 6 other companies, took over another AIM-listed business. So I've done the whole takeover panel side of things. And we grew revenues. When I joined, revenues were 1.1 million. When I left 3 years later, they were 27 million. So that's a 25x growth in 3 years. That was a pretty hectic time. And I left them because I got headhunted to join another AIM-listed business that had been a dot-com survivor that had reversed into a cash shell on AIM. And the founding team were all stepping down at that point. And so they were looking for an experienced AIM CFO, and I joined that business. And over the next 4 years, we raised £40 million. We bought our largest global competitor and put the companies together and did a huge consolidation exercise, and everything was looking hunky-dory. And we came back to the markets and said, we've done everything we said we were. The forecasts are looking good. And a week later, Lehman Brothers went bust. So timing wasn't so cool, but it was an interesting experience. I stayed with that business for another 18 months. The chief exec got fired after the 4th profits warning, even though it wasn't really his fault, but somebody had to go. And I stayed with that business until the end of 2010. And since 2010, I have worked. I've done a number of startups myself. Sadly, none of them really took off, but that's another story. But it was a fantastic learning. And as a result of that, one of the key things that I learned was that I really like working in that entrepreneurial space. I understand the mindset of entrepreneurs. I understand what drives them. I understand what support they need. And so I've specialized literally in the last 10 years in being that very entrepreneurial CFO. I've been a co-founder of several businesses. I often take equity stakes in my clients as part of my deal. And yeah, I developed out of that the methodology, which is called FACE. So F is for fund, A is for acquire, C is for consolidate, and E is for exit. In layman's terms, raise money, buy other things, put them together, and then sell.
Perfect. Well, look, we're going to come on to talk about that, and we'll delve into the book deeper as well. I think just for me, a couple of questions that have kind of come out of your introduction that I'd like to dig a bit deeper into as well. I mean, obviously, you're talking about yourself being a very entrepreneurial CFO, and your strategies have been very aggressive. Well, I think aggressive for most companies. Never mind aggressive for most accountants. I guess the kind of comedy stereotype of accountants is very much not wanting to take risks, not wanting to push the envelope in any way. I mean, why do you think that is, and why do you think you've kind of got a different accounting DNA? I mean, were you ever that conservative accountant, or
Never.
did you realize it didn't work?
I fell into accountancy as a profession. So I was originally going to be going into banking and investment banking, and I worked while I was in university in Canada. I worked my summers at the Royal Bank of Canada, and I was all lined up to join their management training program when I graduated. And the autumn before I was due to graduate, Canada went into a significant resources-based recession, and of course Canada is very much a resources-based economy. And so things were really bad. And I remember getting a phone call from the manager at the bank where I'd been working for the past 2 summers. And he called me in and he said, look, this is what's happened. They've frozen all of the management recruitment programs. I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea how long this is going to last. I'll give you a job as a bank teller if you want, David. And then he sort of looked at me and said, but you didn't really go to university to be a bank teller, did you? And I thought, okay, there's a very clear message. That was probably the first career advice I'd ever received. And so I went up to the university campus recruitment office, and the next big thing coming up in about 3 weeks' time was the milk round from all of the big accountancy firms. And I had a couple of friends whose fathers were accountants. I went and spoke to them. One of them was very much that sort of gray, Monty Python kind of accountant. Let's not move into lion taming. Let's perhaps go to insurance first for anyone who's a Monty Python fan. And that very conservative kind of thing. But the other one was a property developer and an entrepreneur. And he showed me how a lot of the things that you learn in accountancy are incredibly valuable in business. And I thought, okay, that's the model that I want to go for. I describe myself as a right-brained accountant. So I've done different psychometric tests and things, and I have a dominant right brain as opposed to left brain. So I'm much more creative. I'm much more thinking about ideas, thinking about opportunities, thinking creatively. I've been trained to do the very detailed, very logical, very step-by-step kind of traditional accountancy stuff. So I can do that, but that's not my natural personality.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was you said you've as an entrepreneur yourself, you've launched quite a few businesses that haven't actually taken off. I mean, if you look back at those, why do you think they haven't taken off, and what learnings do you think you can tell our audience from that?
So I'll mention 2 that are the most interesting, because a couple of others just sort of never went anywhere. So one of them, when I left my last PLC role, I decided I wanted to do something completely different. And I sat down and said, well, what are the things that I'm most passionate about? And talked to friends and talked to family. And it boiled down to a choice between either wine or music. And my then teenage daughters said to me, Dad, you're too old for the music business. Why don't you do wine? So I thought, okay, great. I'll launch a wine business. So I went to night school, got my wine trade qualifications. Everyone I spoke to said wine is a brutally competitive industry, but I just steamrolled on and thought this will be great. I got out there with my qualifications and started trying to sell wine to people. And I discovered that they were right. Wine is a brutally competitive industry. I had no track record in wine. I was used to dealing with people where I was coming from a position of being, board level at public companies. So someone that people were listening to all of a sudden, oh, well, why are you trying to flog me wine? And it was a very kind of eye-opening experience. It was a very tough learning experience for me. I went into a period of very deep denial that lasted for about 18 months. But fortunately, I got through that and was able to move on. And that's when I started going back to more of the, this is what I am, this is what I'm known for. I still have the wine business today. I have a handful of private clients who've basically outsourced their wine buying to me. As my best friend puts it, I get to enjoy my hobby and drink wine at wholesale prices. So it's still going. All is not lost then. All is not lost. In fact, I just took delivery yesterday of 120 bottles of wine. So my wine cellars at home are stocked again, because during lockdown they got rather depleted. The other business, so I mentioned earlier that I had worked at the BBC, and I met a chap through the BBC. We didn't meet then, but we connected subsequently. And he is a television producer. He's a fascinating guy. He's first generation immigrants from a Pakistan family. Sorry, he's second generation. So his parents immigrated. He was born here. So he's done a lot of work around the role of the media in Islam and with Muslims. And he came up with this idea of creating an online television platform like Netflix, that was focused very much on content for a Muslim audience, and very much looking not at a lot of what you see in the mainstream, which is very negative, very sort of, terrorist related or extremist related, but things that portray the culture, the music, the art, the scientific contributions, all of the positive things that Islam and Muslims have contributed to society. And I started looking into this and thought, wow, this could really take off. I mean, there's a global population of 2 billion Muslims, and most of the mainstream content that's focused around a Muslim audience is either very religious or very news based, and there's not really anything that's arts and cultural and entertainment and documentaries and stuff. And I started to research it and spent time with him and thought, yeah, this sounds really cool. And so I said, look, what does it matter? I'm not a Muslim, is that going to be a problem? And he said, no, absolutely not. And so we spent about 6 months working together on kind of getting a concept ready. And then we looked at what were some different funding strategies. And what we initially did, we put together a 3-minute video and put it out on social media and said, here's a product that we're looking at launching. Here's who we are. This is what it's going to do. We're looking for 500 people to pay an advance subscription of £100, and that'll enable us to get the MVP built. And within a month, we had the 50 grand that we were seeking. And so we got the MVP going, and then we did a crowdfunding round on Crowdcube. We raised £120,000. That enabled us to build the full streaming website and get some initial content. So we launched the kind of alpha version beta version of the product, I guess. Yeah, because it was a live thing and had content. We launched that with 50 hours of content, and had great plans on what we were going to do and how we were going to scale it up and how it was going to grow and how amazing it would be, because there were 2 billion potential customers and hardly anybody wanted to subscribe. And we carried on working on it for probably 2 years, and then I decided to step back and focus on other things. I'm still tangentially involved in the business. It's still going. So over the time I was involved more actively with it, we raised a total of about £350,000. And they've just launched an app version. We managed to get picked up as a supplemental channel on Amazon Prime. I still think there is a global audience for this product, but for some reason, the marketplace hasn't taken off with it yet. I am still the 3rd largest shareholder in the company, so I do hope that it will take off one day.
Okay, well, look, let's talk about Face.
Yeah.
Where did it come from? Did you already operate by this theory prior to writing the book?
Sort of. So in 2015, I completed Daniel Priestley's Key Person of Influence program. And one of the things within that program, so it talks about the 5 Ps: pitch, publish, product profile, and partnerships. And publish is all about getting written content out there and ultimately getting a book published. And I started to do some blogging and a few other bits and pieces and writing things here and there, but never really sat down and took the book seriously. And then all of a sudden, events happened with one particular client that I'd been involved with, where that relationship came to an end, and I had a lot of time. And one of my other best friends gave me a good friendly kick up the bum and said, "You've been talking about writing a book for years. Now you've got the time, get it done." And so I sat down in January of last year and started writing. As I like to say, the book was 30 years in the making. 6 months in the writing and editing, and it came out in July of last year. And that's probably the most amazing thing about that, is it's really helped me to focus and be 100% clear strategically on, this is what I do, these are the kinds of businesses that I work with, these are the services that I offer, and therefore all of these other things that had been distractions and stuff, I now know, yeah, fine, they're distractions, they're opportunities. And if people come to me and say, "Oh, can you do my bookkeeping for me?" Well, no, that's not what I do. I know people who can do it, and I can pass it on to them and all that. But it's really, really enabled me to niche down and say, this is what I do.
And that's been raising funding,
buying companies, putting them together, and selling companies. I'm actually working on the development of a program that we'll be launching in the new year, that's going to be targeted at entrepreneurs who have been in business for maybe 10, 15 years. They've grown their business up to a certain size, let's say sort of 2 million plus in turnover. They're starting to think, I might want to exit in the next 5 or 10 years. And, again, depending on who you speak to, I meet a lot of entrepreneurs who say, love the idea, but I'm not ready for an exit. So I'm looking for the ones who are starting to think maybe in 5 years, I'll be ready for an exit, but my business isn't at a size yet where I want it to be in order to exit. And by using my methodology, we can help to scale it up, so that it is at that level.
And do you believe the methodology can be applied to all businesses in all sectors? I mean, what's the kind of entry level requirement? At what point is somebody too small to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say all businesses in all sectors, but in reality, no. So, I mean, in terms of funding, so the F is for fund. In terms of that, obviously, you've got different options. So you can, any business can look at grant funding. That's not an area that I specialize in, but, I know there's lots of grants and things out there. So for people who are starting out, that's often a good area. Many businesses can look at debt funding, particularly currently with the coronavirus stuff. There's the CBILS program and the bounce back loan scheme that are still running. I know CBILS is due to end at the end of September, but bounce back loan goes until November, where you can borrow money at quite attractive rates and get things through much faster. But my real area of concentration is more on equity funding. And realistically, it's either there is funding potential for really hot startups if they're in a very cool sector. But kind of my target companies are people who are already turning over £1 million plus, so that they've got the traction and they can demonstrate valuation. Because, if you're a startup and you go out and raise, let's say, £1 million, but you've only got a valuation of 250 grand, well, the angels or venture capitalists end up owning the vast majority of the company, and there's no value for the founder. So it's really important to establish a baseline valuation first, so that, at least in that first funding round, the founder doesn't lose control, or the founding team doesn't lose control. as you go down the line, raise more substantial sums of capital, people have to get used to the idea that they may not be in control anymore, but they're already used to operating in a business that has other people who are involved in it, who are sitting on the board, who are going to be questioning and challenging the strategy and the execution of the company.
And when it comes to acquiring businesses, what are the most common mistakes you see entrepreneurs make, when they go and acquire somebody else's business and try and integrate it with their own?
They go in and think, that sounds really cool. I have no idea how this is going to work, but let's give it a go. And I've seen that happen in a number of occasions. I have one client who works in the PR industry, who had an opportunity to merge with another business and went in and, they got the agreements done. They got their local lawyers to put together the sale and purchase agreement. Turns out the local lawyers have never done this before. So they'll have just taken something off one of their, subscription services. Here's a template sale and purchase agreement. They weren't able to advise them. The deal's gone okay. The funding arrangement has taken longer to settle, so the former owner is still involved and still sort of, meddling about in the business and holding back the new owner from really taking it forward. This particular owner has actually been approached by a competitor recently to potentially merge the businesses. And I'm pleased to say that the first thing that they did was to phone me and have a chat. So we've been able to kind of set them on, this is how the next steps might work. This is what you'd need to be looking at. In terms of other things, I guess, the key thing, if you're buying another business, it's the biggest issue that you've got to address is how are you going to fit it into your existing business? Are you going to run it completely separately? Or are you going to merge the two of them together? If you're going to run it completely separately in its own offices with its own brand, and it's simply that you own it and play some kind of a role strategically and directionally, but there's its own management team, that's one thing. But if you're looking at taking, let's say you're doing, let's say it's an engineering business, and they want to buy another engineering business and put them together so that they've got greater production capacity, and maybe the other company has access to certain customers that you want to have access to in your business. So you're going to bring those two companies together and put them together so that they operate as one. The biggest challenge that you face there is a cultural one. So what are the cultures of the two companies? What's it like to work for company A? What's it like to work for company B? And when you put the two of them together, which culture will prevail? How do you convince people to change culture? I mean, and it was really interesting. Very early on in my career, after leaving PwC, I was working for a big US technology company called NCR, probably best known today for their hole-in-the-wall machines. But at that stage in the early 90s, NCR got bought by AT&T, the US telecoms group, and they merged the two companies together. And NCR had a very kind of command and control structure, and there was a very clear political hierarchy. And AT&T was much more sort of, well, we've got a set of values and we trust everybody, and it's a bit more kind of open and freewheeling. And the two cultures came together, and it was an unmitigated disaster, in all honesty. If you read up on stuff on the internet, NCR AT&T was considered the worst M&A deal prior to the dot-com boom, because the cultures were just different.
Sure. And so we've raised funding, we've acquired, we've hopefully meshed the cultures, and 2 + 2 has equaled 5 or more. When it comes to exiting, I mean, is there a perfect time to exit? How I can think of so many stories where I hear about founders who've hung on and on and on and on, and when they could have got multi-millions, they then end up being days away from bankruptcy and stuck in the business for the rest of their life. I mean, how do you know when it's time to make a graceful exit and collect the cash?
That's a tough question, and it's interesting. I'm working with another client right now who's been approached about a potential acquisition by a strategic buyer. And on the initial approach, the founder's response was, but I'm not done yet. I've got so much more that I want to achieve. And then we sat down and talked through and looked at various things and looked at different options and alternatives. And and we haven't yet got the deal structured in place, but we've said realistically we could position it in a way that it might be worth this amount of money, and if it were worth this amount of money, you could then, there might be a period where you're required to stay on for a year or two, but then you'd be able to move on and do the next thing in your life, and you'll have 7 figures in the bank so that you can go out and scale that business more quickly. Because it's interesting. I think the key thing that my FACE methodology and that fundraising generally enables is it makes growth faster. Because organic growth is great, but it takes a long time and it's really, really hard work. It's not to say that growth through acquisition isn't also hard work, but you can achieve that kind of scale. And like I said, with my first PLC, in 3 years, we grew revenues from 1.1 to 27 million. Doing that with organic growth would be, you'd have to be in a phenomenal sector at the very right place and time to achieve that. So it's all about doing it at speed and scale. But no, coming back to your question, is there an ideal time to exit? It's a market. I think the answer to that is no. I can't remember who it was. I think it was John D. Rockefeller who said, when asked about what was his advice for dealing in the stock market, and he said, never buy at the bottom and never sell at the top, because you never know when that's going to be. You've just got to look at it on a, here we are, and I'm running a business, and someone comes along and offers me a stupid sum of money. Yeah, I'll look at that quite seriously. But it might be that here I am and I'm running a business and someone comes along and offers me a ridiculously insulting sum of money, and I'll just say, well, no thanks, I'm not looking to sell. So that deals with the sort of the speculative approach. The other side is when the founder strategically decides, right, I'm now ready to sell, and I want to sell, let's say, in the next 3 to 5 years. And if they're clever, they will then groom the business for sale. So all of the decisions that they're going to be taking inside the business will be designed towards, how do I make this business as attractive as possible? So I want to show a nice upward trend in my revenues, in my profitability, in my cash flow. Things like coronavirus come along and there's nothing we can do about them. At least, it's one of those things that everybody gets hit by at the same time. But if you're thinking about it strategically, once you've made that decision, hey, I'm ready to sell in the next 3 to 5 year time frame, then take that time and make the company as attractive as you possibly can in order to maximize the value that you get on the other side.
Well, David, thanks a lot for being here, buddy. It's been fantastic to talk to you, and one of the great benefits of these podcasts for me as well is that I get to meet people like yourself from a selfish perspective and ask the questions that interest me, and get to read the books that I like to read. So it's been really interesting to talk to you today. Just for the guys obviously watching and listening, just let them know where they can pick the book up, where they can follow you on social, etc., and get in touch if they want to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is on Amazon. And if you've got listeners around the world, anywhere where Amazon is, you can get it on your local Amazon. So if you just Google David B. Horne, Horne, or the title Add Then Multiply, then you'll find a link to my website. You'll find a link to the book. If you Google David B. Horne, you'll get my page, which has links to the book. And if you're on Amazon, just type in this Amazon search bar, David B. Horne or Add Then Multiply. It's currently available in paperback and Kindle version, and there's an Audible version that is imminently due out, should be out before the end of September.
Perfect. Well,
in terms of social media, it's David B. Horne, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter.
Perfect. All right, buddy. Thanks a lot for being here. Bye, Dave.
Cheers. Thanks, man. Bye-bye.